Is my mic up? There we go. Good evening, everyone. My name is Meredith Gamble. I am the Language Justice Coordinator in the Office of Immigrant Affairs with the city. I'm just here to let you know that we have interpretation tonight in Mandarin, Cantonese, and American Sign Language. If you need interpretation into Mandarin or Cantonese, please raise your hand or come and talk to me and we can set you up with some equipment.
大家好，欢迎来到我们今天晚上的报告发表会。我是移民事务办事处的林怡。那想要跟大家讲，我们今天晚上会有普通话跟。
I'm Amanda Najim Williams. I'm the Director of the Department of Racial and Social Justice. Thank you all for joining us this evening to hear from our esteemed members of the Public Safety for All Task Force, the Civilian Oversight Task Force, and the Anti-Violence Working Group. Before we get into the content of our conversations here today, I'd like to give a moment for Madam Mayor to address you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all. Thank you so much for being here. I especially want to say thank you, my heartfelt thank you, to our Public Safety for All Task Force members. Your dedication, your time, your willingness to engage in this process have made tonight really possible. So truly thank you for your time. It took a lot of work and it took a lot of courage from participants, but as leaders helping to ensure that those most affected by the policies we implement have a seat at the table, and they are helping us to develop those policies. So again, I'm so proud and thankful and grateful to be with you here all tonight. I also want to acknowledge that today is, or now is Chinese New Year, and we have a large group of neighbors here that are with us tonight. So if you bear with me, I just want to say Xin Ne Shao La. So that is Happy New Year's in Chinese. And I also want to acknowledge that some of our counselors are here today. Counselor Strezzo, Wilson, Pineda Neufeld, and Ba. Thank you. I also would like to give a big shout out to our Department on Racial and Social Justice, especially our Director, Nagam Williams, Amanda, who is here, for the year-long support that you've given us with the Public Safety for All Task Force and for bringing us here together tonight. Public safety for all is the goal. It's the goal of my administration, and that to be able to do that effectively, the community itself has always got to be our guiding force. Those most impacted by public safety decisions should be helping us shape them. That's why from the start, my goal has been to ensure that the decision about public safety in Somerville are informed by people who live and work here. Tonight's report is a culmination of more than 3 years of community-based work that began with the Public Safety for All survey in 2022, led to the creation of the task force in 23. We brought together community members, city employees, elected officials, experts in public safety to design solutions rooted in realities and the needs of our city. Supported by RSJ, each task force member, your neighbors, friends, and public servants engaged in extensive training, met with regional and national experts, and worked diligently to develop thoughtful recommendations. Their findings on violence prevention, civilian oversight, and public safety systems represent a major step forward in shaping public safety model that reflects our community values and priorities. They offer real, actionable solutions to create a safer, stronger, and more equitable Somerville. So what's next? We are already taking action. We've hired our new police chief, Chief Benford, who has the management skills to lead an urban, diverse city and who shares in our community values. The Somerville Police Department has already begun implementing recommendations from the staffing and operational analysis, and our Health and Human Services Department have expanded their outreach efforts with community outreach workers. The idea is, to have a holistic approach, a wraparound services, that we have a social worker in our public libraries that provide direct and support resources, that our community outreach workers spend 90% of their time out in the community getting to know people and being able to connect residents to services. So I'm excited to share that we are taking another key step forward. Today, the city has started accepting applications for our Public Safety for All manager. In this role, we will be taking the lead on implementing these public safety recommendations across city departments, from our fire and police officers to our health workers and more. The Public Safety for All program manager will bring together our service providers to help develop this new public safety infrastructure. Collaboration has been key to this process. Many city departments and personnel have played a crucial role in supporting this work, including RSJ, our Office of Immigrant Affairs, Somerstat, the Office of Strategic Planning and Community Development, our legal department, Somerville Police Department, and many others. So I especially want to thank our city staff for their contribution. Their guidance and expertise helped to ensure that the task force had the tools they needed to make informed recommendations. This is just the beginning. We are not simply presenting findings. We are inviting you to take part in the next steps. We need your voices, your ideas, your engagement to move this work forward in a way that reflects the needs of our community. So tonight, I hope you'll all dig into the details. Let us have conversations that will shape the future of public safety in Somerville. And I truly thank you for being a part of the process, and thank you for your commitment to making Somerville a safer and more just city. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for bearing with us, folks, as we were getting our slides set up. But we will move rather swiftly because you are here to hear from our task force and working group members more so than you are to hear from me. But I'd like to just run us through briefly kind of our order of events for the rest of the evening. On your tables and online, you might have already seen, we have the Public Safety for All materials. I will then briefly walk us through an overview of the initiative. I will introduce our task force and working group members, speak a bit to the composition, and then we will get to the Q&A with the task force and working group members. Lastly, we will close, and as the mayor mentioned, we will talk about the Public Safety for All program manager position that went live today. On this slide, as I mentioned, if you haven't already accessed it, feel free to scan the QR code to the Public Safety for All page. This page houses all of the full reports, the executive summaries, infographics, newly released footage of our task force and working group members who might not be on the panel this afternoon, but wanted to share their insights, and other resources as we continue to advance with the initiative. Again, these resources are on tables, but feel free to also scan and follow along. Next, I wanted to take some time to give us an overview of the Public Safety for All initiative. It's super important for us to understand that we didn't get here overnight, but that this is a cumulative, multi-tiered effort. Public Safety for All did not begin in 2025. In fact, this is about a 2.5, if not 3-year initiative that has been chiefly connected to the Department of Racial and Social Justice founding. So as I mentioned, I will keep it brief, but I want to make sure I touch on a few of those key points for you all this afternoon. The first bullet point that you'll see is the Public Safety for All survey. That was conducted in 2022 and ended in 2023. This has been one of the most statistically representative surveys in Somerville history, meaning that we heard from folks that we often do not hear from, multilingual communities. In fact, we had, I believe it was 19 focus groups. 11 of those were offered in a language other than English. We had focus groups in person and virtually, and at all different times of the day. Building on that, we had 8 to 10 different canvassing efforts throughout the city. This was important to make sure that we were hearing from communities most impacted by these pressing issues. We also held 3 block walking endeavors, and then lastly, 3 door knocking endeavors. Moving quickly along again, we have the public safety survey results. If you haven't had a chance to engage with the data that came out of that survey, we encourage you to visit the PSFA webpage where you can access the open data portal. Moving right along, as Madam Mayor mentioned earlier, part of the Public Safety for All initiative was the SPD Staffing and Operations Analysis Report. Again, this was a key part to the Public Safety for All initiative. Building on that, we understand that we have to build capacity for folks to engage prior to the founding of the task forces. With that being said, RSJ chaired up 2 informational opportunities. The first was the Public Safety for All informational series that housed about it was a 5-part series that had representatives from Health and Human Services, the Somerville Police Department, Somerville Fire Department. We had some local neighbors who participated in this, but the groundwork was, what does public safety look like currently in Somerville? And how can we start to learn about what's in place so that we can either improve on that and make something that is truly Somerville-centered and continues to meet the growing needs of our constituents. Turning to the Civilian Oversight webinar series, that was a 4-part series. It laid the groundwork for what civilian oversight is, both on a national level, but then also some nearby, where we had interviews and webinars with our local municipalities and their civilian oversight entities. Again, for that webinar series, we had engagement from folks within the Somerville Police Department as well to be able to speak about their internal processes. All of these opportunities were available and open to the public to participate in, and should you wish to look at those recordings, you can still access them at, you guessed it, the Public Safety for All webpage that we're constantly promoting for your learning knowledge. The 5th prong in the Public Safety for All initiative is the founding of our 3 groups. If you hear me talk about it, I often call them siblings in this work, because while each of those groups have a very distinct charge, they are intricately related to one another. So that is the Civilian Oversight Task Force, the Public Safety for All Task Force, and the Anti-Violence Working Group. Lastly, for at least this stage of our work, is the launching of the Public Safety for All Program Manager position. This position, as we mentioned earlier, has officially launched earlier today. You will see a QR code and the webpage for folks to be able to start applying to that. Again, the purpose of me giving this overview is for you to understand that we did not do this work alone. Many of you in this room, whether it be a city department, community members, a business who allowed us to be there and table, folks who shared with their newsletters, and folks who wanted to bring people into the fold who might not have traditionally been there, you have been a part of this. It is very important for us to show you that this is building on the capacities that we've previously had to get to where we are today. Now I'd like to speak a little bit more closely to our task force members and our working groups. I want to start by saying thank you. This has been a long journey to get here, and I'm hoping that your neighbors and community members will have a better understanding of all of the efforts that you've collectively put together to get us here. So I won't speak to the composition of each of the groups individually, but what I will tell you is across all three of these groups, we had representation from our constituents who applied to represent different wards, different demographic backgrounds. We had subject matter experts with both lived and professional experiences. That is incredibly important when we talk about the voices who are often not heard. We had representation from city staff members, city councilors, school committee members, faith-based community organizations, and more. I want you all to get familiar with this because these are truly your neighbors. They have put their heart and soul into these recommendations and have really worked hard to get here. So again, you'll get to see their composition when we call each of their groups up, but wanted to give you the oversight of kind of what that looks like. Secondly, I'd like to speak to the role of the Department of Racial and Social Justice versus that of the members of the task forces and the working groups. RSJ in this process was really the master curator in organizing meetings, connecting folks to resources, whether that had been data, whether that was reaching out to folks at a local level or a national level and other municipalities. It was coordinating public events similarly to this. We held 3 listening sessions with the Civilian Oversight Task Force, which built upon, as we mentioned, the survey results from the Public Safety for All survey, and then the Public Safety for All Task Force also held a community workshop in April of 2024. RSJ, as I mentioned in this process, really coordinated those meetings, coordinated the spaces, and made sure that the folks were staying attached to their charge and moving along. The working group and the task force members, they are chiefly responsible for the meat of these reports. They wrote these reports, they talked about it, they really found what consensus looks like to put forth recommendations that are representative of this community. It is not a one-size-fits-all approach. Speaking specifically to the trainings and activities, I know you'll probably hear some of this from the task force and working group members themselves, but I do want to take a moment to highlight that because when you've been doing this work for 20 plus months, which is exactly how long folks have been commissioned with us, things can get lost in the fray. So in addition to trainings around ADA or community engagement, or plain language, members of our task forces and working groups also participated in ride-alongs and the simulator training activities with the Somerville Police Department. They also participated in psychological first aid training. They also reviewed several other municipalities, both near and far, to assess what worked and what didn't work in those spaces. Again, happy to dive into a little bit more on what did that training look like and what were the activities that our task force members heard from. But I want to make sure that folks understand this is not something that happened overnight, and we couldn't have done this without all of the folks who made this possible. Turning to what we've learned, some big successes that I'd like to highlight on behalf of RSJ is that the work of these 3 groups really highlighted, I would say, 4 key things. The first was interdepartmental collaboration. As you all have heard here this evening, Madam Mayor kind of gave a preliminary list of the folks within the city who have helped train these members. They have come and sit on panels. They have responded to data requests. They have opened up their doors for office hours questions and made themselves available to ensure that our task force members had the information that they needed. So I do want to take a moment to, again, shout those departments out because they truly went above and beyond to meet the need. So that includes the Somerville office, Somerville Police Department, Health and Human Services, Mobility, Human Resources, 311 Constituent Services, the Law Department, Parks and Rec, Somerset, the Office of Strategic Planning and Development, communications, the web team, and more. That is important, and I know it might not be important to all of our community members, but as a director of a department who understands that everyone has their own task, I couldn't thank them enough for the time and effort that they put into fostering the spaces for our task forces and our working groups. The second thing I'd like to point your attention to is that there was consistent process throughout each phase of the initiative. As I mentioned at the beginning, we went through 6 phases. That was important to understand that this was not a one-off. We are building on the things that this community has said and highlighted as important to them, and we're making sure that we close the loop and report that information back out to you. The third thing that the Department of Racial and Social Justice is also very proud about is that we put equity into action. Our community members who were on these task forces were paid for their time. That is important when we talk about equity and bridging the gap and making sure that folks are compensated for their professional and lived experiences. Lastly, I would say a big win for us was inclusive government. This is a government or on a local level, we want to make sure that we are engaging our community in a meaningful way. So our task force members got to see some of that background work in planning and coordinating across departments. They got to understand the process of, you might have a really big idea and kind of walking it back to figure out what does it take to make this happen. Some lessons learned. I really believe that it's important to be able to speak publicly about some areas that we can grow in. So the first is, and I think our task force members will chuckle, when we embarked on this journey, we envisioned this would have been 6 to 8 months. 20 plus months later, we're still here. And I don't say that without recognizing that, you know, life happens to folks, and our task force members stuck with us as we worked that process. We adapted to the times, we recognized that things happened, and sometimes that prolonged the process. But I'm happy to say that you got an even better product as a result of it. The last thing I will say about some of the lessons learned is that we understand there's a changing landscape, whether that is the federal administration, whether that is on a local level. Throughout this process, we've had folks kind of be able to be tapped in for more periods and then have to step away. But there's constantly a changing landscape. So when you review the recommendations and these reports, account for that. These reports were written at a moment in time, at a place in time, and have not accounted for all of the things that are continuously changing. But that is a piece that we do want to acknowledge at the forefront. In addition to the changing landscape, as I mentioned, there are a number of other considerations. And for the folks who did submit questions in advance, we thank you for that. We've incorporated that into the program this evening. But you will hear from the task force members about some of the considerations, whether that was union considerations. Our task force members had the opportunity to meet with members of the SPEA and SPSOA, for example, and understood, oh, if we are thinking about implementing X, these are the implications that they might have. So again, as we think about that, happy to talk more about those successes and areas that we've learned about as we endeavor for our future opportunities. And now, as I mentioned, we're gonna kind of transition to the key portion of the evening. At this time, I will kind of bring up RSJ's Public Information Officer, Hawken Brooks, and we'd also ask the members of the Public Safety for All Task Force who are going to be speaking on the panel to come and take your places over here. Before I officially pass the baton to Hawken, you'll see on the slide that the Public Safety for All Task Force was tasked with focusing on 2 key areas. They focused on drafting recommendations that will inform the adoption of an alternative co-response and/or an on-response model to address calls for service and identify public safety needs in Somerville.
Secondly, they looked at drafting recommendations that will help and improve Somerville's public safety infrastructure at large. And with that, I will pass it to Hawkins.
Thanks, Amanda. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Good evening. Thank you for being here. My name's Hawkins Brooks. I am the Public Information Officer with the Department of Racial and Social Justice. Importantly, I'm also a Somerville resident, and in that sense, I'm really honored to be here and really honored to see the turnout for what I, both professionally and personally, think is a significant initiative. I don't want to take up the time because it's not about me, so with that being said, I'm going to pass it down the line. Folks, could you just tell us, introduce yourself, and just tell us briefly what brought you here, what brought you to the Public Safety for All Task Force?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Taylor Perkins, and I am the Associate Director of the Joseph E. Corcoran Center for Real Estate and Urban Action at Boston College, and I'm also a Somerville resident. I live down on Heath Street. Really, my why sort of boils down to the fact that I'm a father of a young daughter, a 2.5-year-old, and I think Somerville is a wonderful place, but I also want to continue to work to have it be a place where she someday chooses to raise her family.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ben Struhl. I am the Executive Director of a research center at the University of Pennsylvania, although I'm a nearly 15-year Somerville resident. And we started our research center there with the big question of how can we make the public safety system something that is driven by the community, that starts with the community's priorities and needs, rather than something that is done to the community. And I think that's one of the animating questions of all the work that I do, and I've been very excited to work with my neighbors and fellow community members on the task force.
Good evening. My name is Kimberly Pitts. I'm a constituent. I'm a retired educator. I lived in Somerville for a total of 8 years. My why was because I had an incident in Somerville, and it was important for me after having dealt with the police department. It wasn't anything negative with the police department. I wanted to make sure that voices such as myself in this community were represented. So my why was definitely to make sure that we were represented in this community, have a strong voice, an active voice, and representation. That is why I'm here.
Thanks, everyone. So without further ado, I'm going to get into it. What we have for each group is a few questions from our department. We provided folks with the opportunity to submit questions in advance, so we're going to get to some of those. And then lastly, we're going to open it up to folks from the audience, people here tonight, engage with these people, ask them questions about their experience, how they came to these recommendations. Kim,
Yes.
what was the most impactful part of the process for you?
I can speak without the mic. The most impactful part for me was the ride around with the police department and the stimulator test. As I said, my why was how did the Somerville Police Department operate within the community? And I had some personal issues with policing overall. The day I went in to the police department, I got a better understanding of the pressures that they are under when they are out on the street. It's not as black and white as it seems. There's so much that you have to understand goes into making the decisions that they do when they are confronted on beat. When they are out there, it's not just what you read in the newspapers. It's not just a 20-second snippet or a 2-minute snippet. There's a lot that goes in. And when I had to do the stimulator and I had to protect myself and then make sure I was safe and that the individual that I was dealing with was safe, changed my perspective 360. I have a better understanding of what goes into policing a community.
Thanks, Kim. Taylor, how about you? What was impactful here?
Well, thank you, Kim, for sharing that. And I'm going to give a two-part answer. The first part is a little bit more sort of thinking internally, and we really had a great group. And I want to just say it was impactful to see how many people have come together to care about this process. I think the most impactful thing for me, though, is when we look at what's happening across our nation, what's been happening over the last few years related to policing and perceptions around policing. It's easy to sort of get lost in thinking about divides. Everything that we looked at, be it qualitative data, be it sitting and talking to rank and file police officers, sitting in this cafeteria and talking to community members, to me, showed that we have much more interest convergence. We have much more in common thinking about public safety than we do in terms of differences, and there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to make progress in this community.
Thank you. I think from the RSJ perspective, a big part of this work was ensuring that the people that sat on these groups had the opportunity and the resources and the know-how and the experience to put forward recommendations that were very tailored to this community. They heard from people in other communities, locally, regionally, and nationally. Ben, in what way are these recommendations tailored to fitting Somerville, the Somerville community, and working here?
Yeah, so I think this is something our task force really thought about, is how we can make this customized to where we are. We're all residents. We wanted something that worked for us. There's a lot of abstract notions of, oh, I heard about on NPR this program in Eugene, Oregon. And it's like, okay, well, that's all the way across the country. So does that work here? And the answer isn't necessarily no, but we need to do the hard work to figure out what works within our context of laws, regulations, and the setup of our government to make something that makes people's lives better in a concrete manner, not something that just sounds good or sounds like something else that you heard about that sounds good. So I think we really tried to do that specific work with a wide range of community members, wide range of stakeholders to think, what are your specific needs and how can we address them better?
Taylor, what about you? What do you think is tailored here?
Well, I think one of the things that's tailored and one of the strengths that we have in Somerville is that we are a safe community, and we are a community that has actually a surprising amount of trust between our community and our police department. And so we really, once we worked from that premise, it was great to be in a place where we said we can take a strengths-based approach and we can continue to build on what works here in Somerville already.
Kim, what are you hoping that these recommendations accomplish here in Somerville?
That's a good question. For me, I think what you guys have to understand is that, as Ben said, we took a look at everyone in the community. We did not shortchange anyone, and we wanted to make sure that while working with the police department and the recommendations that we put forth, every single group of people were considered. And the thing that we want to make sure is that the proper training, not only via the police department, but other entities that we hope to see maybe one day implemented, build a bridge where we can really work together as a community, a true community, to make all of us safer. You know, whether it was for mental health, how do we approach the homeless? How do we approach domestic violence? We looked at all the data. We looked at all the input from the community, and we came up with the best possible recommendations. And I want to thank, you know, the police department for the work, for wanting to work with us. They do want to do a great job, and I think we can build a community here that we all can be proud of.
Ben?
Which question?
Before you do that,
Recommendations.
just want to remind folks to please use the mic, not only for the folks that are in the room, but for the folks who are at home, and for, you know, the folks who might not be able to hear. So please, 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 all panelists, use the microphones as we move forward. Thank you.
Yeah, so for the community, we really, we want something that can actually change, can actually be put into effect. And we really thought about timelines as well. And we wanted to create recommendations that were something that Somerville could run with. This wasn't something about, hey, in 10 years, if the exact right conditions are in place, then you'll have this. It was about what is the next step that is going to potentially prevent someone from entering the criminal justice system, that we can divert them away from the front door, not in 10 years, but next month. And I think that is a perspective that we need to hold of, it's not about waiting for the perfect thing to come around. It's about how we can work with our community members to iterate something better in the short term.
Thanks. And then lastly, for our RSJ questions, Taylor, we tried to provide task force members with the opportunity to meet with a lot of public safety experts from New England, but also nationally. What did you learn across those meetings?
Well, I think that we learned, really it's kind of a theme that we needed to figure out something that was going to fit for Somerville. We were lucky enough to have colleagues and experts from across the country who were willing to meet with us. But really no two cities are the same. And it's something we were really lucky to have Ben with us, who has a national perspective based on his work. I think that answers the question.
Thanks. This next question is one that we received multiple times in advance of this meeting. We put out a jot form where folks were able to submit questions. I've said this earlier, my personal and professional perceptions aligning. I would be remiss if we didn't ask the question, and I think everyone from the Department of Racial and Social Justice was on the same page. A lot of people are going to see these recommendations and be curious about the Public Safety for All Task Force recommending a co-response model. A lot of people in this community might be asking, why not alternative response? For folks who haven't heard that term, that is an emergency response structure that could place responders outside of the police department. Ben, walk us through a little bit of the task force thinking on that. What were the considerations? Did you consider alternative response? What brought you to co-response, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, there is a spectrum of different types of ways that you could think about how civilians could improve the public safety system. And so it ranges from alternative response to co-response to embedding civilians in police departments in different ways. And when you look at some of the alternative response models in this country, I've had the privilege of working with some, talking with some, talked with the Whiteberg Clinic, which runs the well-regarded Cahoots van in Eugene, Oregon. And they say, you can't just drop a van into a community. You need a place that you can bring people. You need services you can deliver to people. You need to have a prevention strategy that you are addressing people with. And they would complain to me about, well, we pick people up from the street, we try and serve them in the van, and then we have nowhere to bring them. So as a government, we can't just think about these piecemeal solutions. We need to think about the whole picture of how people are being served in the community and how they are being connected to services that might prevent them from having to interact with the criminal justice system in a way that is going to harm their lives going forward.
Does anyone else have anything to add on that point? Because I know a lot of people were wondering about it. Okay.
Yeah, if someone has a specific question on this, I'd be happy to elaborate. But we worked with the existing clinicians who are based in Somerville Police Department and talked to them. And these are people, they're not police officers. They're trained in conflict mediation and mental health and other specialized things. And we started thinking about all the things that those people who are already in place could do and what they could bring to the community in ways that could really create a lot of potential and improve a lot of lives. And then if you think about setting up an alternative response, you have to think about, where do they get the cars? Where do they park? How do they handle insurance? How do they handle laws saying whether they can go into the road or not? All of these things are going to be huge barriers that you wouldn't have to do with a co-response model.
I think it's a great answer, Ben, and I agree. I just wanted to add for everyone here, one of the things that we as a task force did is we went down to the police station multiple times, each of us, and we sat with the 911 dispatchers and we listened to what a 911 call actually entails. And I'll tell you, a 911 dispatcher often has very limited information on what's happening at a scene. And so In a perfect world, you'd want to say, okay, we're sending an alternate responder here, we're sending a police responder there. In the real world, and we also looked at all the data that comes out of our CAD, our computer-assisted dispatch system, the 911 calls are not often that clear, and you could see situations that actually cause harm when you're trying to mitigate harm based on that lack of detail.
One more detail I'll add is we talked to a wide range of community members and really tried to think about different groups of community members. And for pretty much every group of community members, including community members of color, community members who lived in the parts of the city that experienced the most crime, they expressed a preference for co-response over alternative responders. And you can see this data in the Public Safety for All survey. So we also really try to take community input into account as well in part of our thinking.
Definitely wanted to make sure to touch on that point. We have a little bit of time left. I want to open it up to any questions from those in attendance. If someone has, I see one hand back there. I'm going to go there. I'm going to get the question. I'm going to say it into the mic. I'm going to bring it back. Next time, I'm going to have 2 mics, folks.
My name's Monica Luke. I live outside Davis Square, and I'm a mental health advocate for my day job. I was also an RSJ ambassador for a while. I hear a couple of things in this response, and this is an area that is of extreme interest to me. Alternative responses is something I talk about all the time. One is, it sounds to me like you're proposing this almost like it's incremental. In other words, it was easier because you had certain pieces of infrastructure in the police department already. Does this decision to go with co-response, which is something that was being done 10 years ago, a step in a different direction, or are you taking alternative response off the table indefinitely?
Thanks, Monica. One thing I'll add before turning this back over to our task force members is that these are recommendations, and when I say that, I mean just that. They're not putting anything off the table. They are recommending what's in the report, just to be clear on their role, as the task force members and your neighbors. But in terms of what else Monica asked, any thoughts, folks?
Yeah, so I've really had the privilege of working with a lot of different types of programs across the country, and we talk about some of the considerations for an alternative response program in our recommendations in the appendix. And I think those considerations are really important to consider or address before we think about what kind of alternative response models might be effective. How we can work with specialists and a specialist response system in a good way. If you are relying on specialists, and this is an experience Boston has had even with its co-response model, it can be difficult because you want to get your specialist to an incident. Well, you have limited specialists, so okay, now you're going to have to wait 4 hours for those specialists to get to the incident. At that point, you're no longer effectively intervening with someone. So you say, well, we're going to hire more specialists. Well, it's hard to find them, and it's also hard to schedule them out. Okay, well, if we have more of them, there's going to be large periods of time where the specialists aren't doing anything, and some periods of time when they're going to be in high demand. So all of these things are big challenges, and I think one of the interesting ideas about the co-response model I've seen people say is, oh, well, we see some of the harm that the criminal justice system creates. And so something that is further from the criminal justice system, like an alternate responder, could be better because it's further from the harm that the criminal justice system creates. But there's another way to look at this, which says if you want to help keep people away from the front door to the criminal justice system, stand close to the front door of the criminal justice system. And I think that approach could have some greater potential in some ways. Could you get the clinicians based in Somerville Police Department to be regularly reviewing instances on body camera footage with officers saying, okay, here's how you handled this situation, which might have had a mental health component, and here's how you could handle it again the next time. I think there's a lot of potential for clinicians working in police departments to really prevent harm in those sorts of ways.
Any other thoughts?
With that being said, I see your hand and I apologize. Got to keep it moving. I invite you to come up and talk with the RSJ staff after, and any of the task force members, should they be here. I think we're all very invested in this work. As a plug, body cameras, the appendix, these are all things that are now live on somervillema.gov/PSFA. So if you're interested in reading more about them, you can find it there. With that being said, I'm going to invite up our members of the Civilian Oversight Task Force, and we'll continue this conversation anew, this time focusing on civilian oversight. So thank you to the folks from the Public Safety for All Task Force.
As our civilian oversight task force members make their way to the front, a nice refresher is that the Civilian Oversight Task Force was tasked with producing recommendations that could outline establishing the city's first ever civilian oversight mechanism. That's including its powers, duties, composition, and more. So you'll hear from two of our panelists today. You'll be able to hear from more of their task force members online with the recording. And we do have two mics, so again, time permitting, we will have RSJ staff will be able to assist as we come to you. But we'll keep track of the time. With that being said, I will pass it back to Hawkins.
All right, thank you. You have heard from me and you've seen the format here, so I'm going to pass it down the line for our civilian oversight members to just give us a brief introduction and tell us all about what brought them to this work.
Hello, my name is Peter Paluzzi. I've been a Somerville resident for almost 12 years now. Louder, Peter. Got it. I guess what drew me into this, I believe it was my wife that first, even louder, first brought this to my attention. I have a background, I went to school for human services with a concentration in legal studies, focusing on prison reform specifically. I previously, before my current job, worked at ROCA, which is a nonprofit organization based in Boston, Chelsea, Springfield, Holyoke, that focuses on high-risk young adults and violence intervention, behavioral prevention. And I really just saw this as an opportunity to kind of use the knowledge I've gained through the different working experiences and through school, and to kind of give back to my own community and use that to try to change some things here.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm Maria Beeman. I'm a longtime Somerville resident, and my day work, I'm a lawyer by training, and I do research projects around the country to improve the criminal justice system, and I have an emphasis on public defender system improvement. And I just really wanted to do something to improve the criminal justice system in my own community, so that's what attracted me to the role.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name is Ernest St. Louis. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Northeastern University. And what brought me to this work is that, my personal experiences with the police, both good and bad, as well as my research, which focuses on informing policies that informs policies that promote police-community relations. And so I felt that my interests, scholarly-wise, aligns real closely with the initiative.
Thank you, everyone. So let's get into it. Peter, what was the most impactful part of this process for you?
For me, one of the most impactful parts of the process was the many trainings we received, and a lot of the information we got in regards to the history of community oversight. It's been around, or at least thought of, a lot longer than I had imagined. It's only start popping up in my circles the last 5 to 7 years, but it's been 20, 25 years, 30 years as an idea. From my own perspective, I was on the community engagement subcommittee, so we kind of went out there early and we put together listening sessions with the community where questions were posed about what they were specifically looking for in the community oversight board and what they wanted to see ultimately when we decided to put together the recommendations. So just the idea of the way we did the outreach to the community, the way it was spread out, the amount of different responses we got, and covering many demographics within Somerville, and just the way that it was a lot of emphasis was put on getting community response from the people that are going to be most impacted by what we're trying to formulate here. I guess that was probably the most impactful part for me.
Ernest, sir, in what ways do you think these recommendations are tailored to fit and work in Somerville?
Sure. So we listened to the community real closely, and we heard their concerns and their needs, right? With two being that concerns regarding accessibility with the current disciplinary process or the complaints review process, and also some discomfort with just accessing the process, right? And so by listening to the community, well, I'm listening now. By listening to the community, we decided to offer various routes to file complaints, right? So in person, online, and we also have recommended targeted initiatives looking at marginalized communities that are more impacted than others.
So I just want to add one thing to that, which was that when we started this process, we did not know that the Post Commission existed, and we learned that midway through. And then we also learned that there's alternatives to police engagement, involvement, oversight, including the Post Peace Officer Standards Training Commission. Everybody's hands are up, and I'm talking really loudly, I promise. There's also the Middlesex District Attorney, and there's the Somerville Police Department itself. These are all mechanisms to file individual complaints. And we wanted to go beyond that, not duplicate that, not replicate any of that, fill in gaps where there might have been some on individual complaints, but also provide an avenue to meet with, to look at patterns and practices and to look at kind of broader issues of the community engagement and mistrust that may exist between the community and the police. So that was kind of one of the things that we tailored to our recommendations for this oversight entity.
Peter, in terms of the recommendations that your group put forward, what do you hope they accomplish long term?
Yeah, I hope that the recommendations obviously aid in the creation of a civilian oversight committee. I want them to help create something that the city and its residents and the community can be proud of, and confident in their ability to effectively and equitably carry out the responsibilities that we recommended in terms of the types of oversight, the types of, not services per se, but like what they're providing for the community, especially transparency and the information availability that people are going to have to be able to see the process and to feel that it is, again, transparent and something that they can kind of follow through, and not just something that happens behind closed doors and get a response a few months later and you don't know why, what, when, where, or how. So yeah, and then again, just that we can implement a lot of the ideas from the community itself into the creation of the Civilian Oversight Board.
Maria, I want to call out a few of the organizations or groups that we set up meetings for, including nationally the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, known as NACOL, and then the Civilian Oversight Task Force also had the opportunity to meet with representatives from Boston and Cambridge. What stood out to you about those meetings? What did you learn that sort of informed the recommendations that your group made?
Yeah, so I mean, in my day-to-day work, comparative experience is super important. It's always very helpful to do comparative work into other jurisdictions and other models that you can learn about. So that it was very helpful. We learned about alternative models that may and may not work in Somerville. One thing we heard about was mediation in Chicago, and we all thought, wow, okay, we haven't seen that in Boston or in Cambridge, which were neighboring communities that we did look at that have oversight entities. So it was very helpful. And I also just wanted to underscore that the presence of the NACOL principles pointed a way for us to point to principles and standards that the new entity can lean into when it's developing its path forward.
What are some of those principles?
There's 13 principles.
Okay, all right.
Independence, transparency, data, there's a whole bunch, and they are in the report, so I encourage you to look at them.
That's on the moderator. Bad question. Ernest, moving on. Tell us about the specific, or describe for the audience what the model of oversight you recommended, you might characterize that model as, and what considerations prompted this group to recommend this model?
Yeah, so we recommended a model that is more so a support system, if you will, that will serve as like a backlog for, not a backlog, but like a safety net for the pre-existing, or the existing, I guess, models that exist, right? Not models, but police, civilian review, not civilian review, but complaints review, right? So we have post, we have internal affairs from, you know, the police. We also have the DA office. And so we didn't want to duplicate the work of these existing bodies. And so what we did was we just recommended a, you know, a model that's more tailored to Somerville that will support civilians going through the process. And when these models, or not these models, but these existing bodies fall short, then we'll step in to you know, take over.
So with that said, that last question was thematically, it came up in a few of the responses to our jot form, which means I'm going to open it up after getting to those pre-submitted questions to anything that folks in the audience might be curious about, whether it's the recommendations or hearing from some of the folks up here tonight. Well, I can't complain if I don't have to get up. Oh, I do have to get up and awkwardly walk.
I got it.
Oh.
Hi, just a quick question. So I'm just curious how this collection of folks is going to protect the anonymity of complainants. Is that, has that been talked about as far as preventing retaliation or potential complications for people that are using this service?
So, I mean, I just want to be clear that what we set out are recommendations for this new creature, however, you know, whatever gets created. And we underscored that confidentiality is going to always be paramount and most important. We don't outline exactly the technique that they're going to take to preserve confidentiality, but it's one of the principles, again, of NACOL that I refer to. I mean, so that's going to be up to them to make sure that those processes are in place. But for instance, when we recommended that the new entity stay abreast of all complaints that are ongoing about SPD, whether it's with post or SPD internal or something else alternative. So the commission itself will know what complaints are ongoing, but it won't spread them around in the public. Nothing will be individually identified, any individual that's in the midst of a particular investigation or procedure. So I hope that will become clear as the organization gets formed, but it'll be a paramount concern.
Yeah, I was just going to say that we recommend that information is anonymized, although for transparency reasons, we will release like summaries, or the board will release summaries of complaints and their outcomes, but all information will be anonymized, right? And the aim of doing this, the aim for that is to be transparent and promote accountability.
Latoya, we got one more question back there, it looks like.
Hi, y'all. First of all, thank you so much for such a thoughtful report. My name is Dana. I live in Ball Square. I'm curious if y'all gave any thought to how recommendations made by the Civilian Oversight Task Force would actually result in like real tangible consequences. For myself, for example, I worry about police union restrictions, like how those things would actually like become tangible consequences if there is a recommendation that the Oversight Committee comes up with.
Any thoughts on unions? No thoughts on unions. Okay.
I'll say this, not as a member of the Civilian Oversight Task Force. We gave the RSJ put time between the police department unions and the Civilian Oversight Task Force to talk about union considerations. It's something that is detailed slightly in the report. That is, thinking back earlier in our presentation, lesson learned, the landscape, the changing landscape. It's difficult to make a report that produces recommendations that are considerate of every union bylaw. I don't have a better answer than that. I'm also not a member of the task force. It's a really great question. And these recommendations are a framework that will necessitate a lot more filling in of the details on the matter. So I think that my hope is that the mayor and the city councilors who advance and are activists about putting these things into action adequately consider the union implications as well. So thank you for that question. I'm sorry we couldn't do a better answer. Any last thoughts? Let's wait one more question, and then we are going to move on to the anti-violence working group.
Thank you. My name is Derek Rice. More of a thought and comment of appreciation. I believe it was the Civilian Oversight Task Force report, which I felt did a really good job of highlighting the history of the topic in Somerville, going back 5 years. It's been since the summer of 2020 that we've been promised civilian oversight, so I think it's really long overdue. I've been part of conversations looking at recommendations and reports that have been delivered to the city of Somerville, written by the city of Somerville, having seen the same recommendations over and over again unactioned. It's really refreshing to see a report with recommendations acknowledge past bodies of work and the context that the report is in, so thank you.
With that being said, thank you, folks. This has been the Civilian Oversight Task Force, and I would now like to welcome up our representatives from the Anti-Violence Working Group.
As our anti-violence working group members make their way to the front, a refresher. The Anti-Violence Working Group was tasked with producing recommendations that focused on mitigating 4 types of violence in the city, specifically gun and gang violence, domestic violence, and traffic violence. And with that, I will pass it back to Hawken.
All right, you're sick of me by now, so I'm going to pass it down to my right, where you can get to know the Anti-Violence Working Group members and a little bit about what brought them to this process.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Rachel Angerhofer, and I am the director of Domestic Violence Prevention Programs at Respond. Respond has been an organization serving Somerville for 50 years, helping survivors of domestic violence. So when I learned that there was a group being formed in Somerville, really dedicated to addressing violence in the city, I absolutely wanted to be a part of it. So that is why I became involved.
Hi, I'm Gia LaChapelle. Formerly, I worked in community organizing around houseless individuals and socioeconomic disparities in Somerville. I'm currently a Northeastern law student. I entered the work after seeing what I did in community organizing and addressing violence around houseless individuals and how socioeconomic demographics affect violence in Somerville.
Hi, I'm Mary Ann Wallace. I'm a lifetime resident of Somerville. During the day, I am a social worker working with families that are in crisis. I came to this as a way to uplift some of the experiences of trauma that they've had in their exposure to violence.
Thank you, everyone. Mary Ann, what was the most impactful part of this process?
I think for me, one of the most impactful part of the process was the data of the reoccurring exposure to violent situations that our residents experience, especially in Ward 4 and Ward 1. They have the highest rate of repeat exposure.
Rachel, how about for you?
So I would say for me, one of the most impactful part was really working as a team and really seeing the ways community comes together first to share information, to share data, to better understand where people are most impacted by these various different topics that we were addressing, and then seeing people come together and really share ideas, an exchange of ideas, to come with some consensus and to prioritize different goals, really with the input of folks from the community in mind throughout that process.
As we've talked about, a big emphasis for all these groups was finding solutions that work here and work now. Gia, what about the way that these are tailored might be a good sign for Somerville?
Yeah, reiterating from the past panels, I think it's important to stress that these came from conversations with the community, surveys from the community, as well as panels, and I think it really honed into specifically what families in Somerville need. I'm emphasizing families because one of my biggest takeaways is I think I'm one of the youngest panelists here, or youngest members of the group. Started the work when I was 21. I've heard so much from families and parents who know the community best, and I think their input around things like a communication network when there's violence and they're worried about their kids coming home from school, things like that are so tailored to the community and show that folks really want to work together.
Rachel, what do you think?
So I think one of the things that really fits tailoring it really to Somerville is one of the things that really struck me is that Somerville's really well positioned for this work. There's already a lot of places where this work is being done and highlighted throughout the city, where these additional sort of recommendations and ways that folks from different places that this is already happening in various pockets throughout the city can come together and work together and sort of join forces to work on these goals, and that really became highlighted through this process.
Marianne, what do you hope that these recommendations accomplish here?
I would hope that people would look at them and realize we did a lot of conversations, really tried to be thoughtful, and really tried to look at what needed a next step. And a lot of the work we did, we felt like it would be an ongoing basis of continuing to build on the work and the recommendations we made.
Gia, how about you?
Kind of similar to what Marianne said, I think beyond just what the recommendations say on paper, I hope that the campaign and the personal details involved in this project empower Somerville community members to come together, that they do have something to offer, each and every one of them, to this experience of shaping a safer Somerville. And I hope people take away from that, oh my God, I can come to these community meetings, I can speak out on it, I can join these panels or answer the door when knocked upon to try and make the community safer, because everyone we talked to did have great ideas that, you know, were taken into account.
As with each of our groups, we try to set up as many opportunities for discussion and learning between these working group members, I should say, and experts from close and far. This group worked very closely with the nationally recognized Urban Peace Institute, but it also convened quite a bit with representatives that are internal to the city of Somerville or service providers that are active here in Somerville but work outside of the city. Rachel, what stood out to you about those opportunities, both thinking about the Urban Peace Institute and national organizations, but also the people that are doing the work here now?
So from my perspective, obviously my particular main priority is domestic violence. And I think through talking through all of these different groups in these panels, there's really an opportunity to see both, it's sort of a two-pronged situation. One, and this is true for domestic violence, but also all forms of violence, is that we want to work at those things from a place of prevention, so that we're really working to understand how to prevent these incidents from occurring in our communities. But then we also want to be available from a response perspective as well, so that anybody that is impacted by violence, whether it's domestic violence or other forms of violence, that there is a plan in place to appropriately respond to their needs as well. And I think by bringing these different opportunities to hear from other people that are doing this work on a larger national scale, as well as all of our local leaders and stakeholders that were a part of the different panels. There's really a lot of opportunity for communicating, collaborating, bringing these issues to the forefront. And those panels where we were able to talk together really highlighted that.
Gia, how about you? What stood out?
Yeah, I think meeting with a national organization and then so many local panels as well. I believe the Urban Peace Institute and the work they did kind of provided a framework for the type of questions that we should be asking of these government groups, especially also with the SPD panels and in our individual ride-alongs, to kind of see if they know the work that's being done nationally or elsewhere and their kind of internal responses to it. Like Rachel said on prevention, it was a big eye-opener for me working with the SPD panels on their focus on prevention and, you know, in some cases, the motivations behind being an officer. That was something that was new to me and opened my eyes to their being of Somerville citizens themselves. And then, like again, through all of the other panels, those national guidelines kind of helped shape those conversations.
Thanks so much. With that being said, I want to open it up to folks that might have questions in the audience. Latoya, the first hand I saw was in the back there.
Hey everybody, can you hear me okay? Cool.
Great.
Okay. My name is Kevin Foster. I live in Ward 3. I just wanted to thank you all for the incredible work. I read all the reports, and even though this was the smallest one, it definitely had a lot to say. And some of the recommendations about Ward 1 and 4, I see that every day when I walk through those wards, and so I just want to thank you for that. My question is around domestic violence. On page 9 of the report, I'm just going to quote here, the second theme identified was the high level of distrust between the community and law enforcement. For instance, panelists shared that domestic violence is grossly underreported due to fear, stereotypes, distrust with law enforcement, and distrust with law enforcement. Domestic violence victims often lack trust with SPD due to prior negative experiences with law enforcement. I'm going to go then to page 11, in which one of the goals was for a community organization. This is the first bullet point on page 11. Community organizations as viable alternatives to SPD. So I guess my question is, do you feel like that would actually be effective in in a city department, maybe attached with an alternative emergency response, alternative prevention, and also alternative aftercare for what that isn't involving the police, which in this report states that certain members do not trust. Thank you.
I want to give folks the opportunity to respond to this tough question. I do want to make clear that their recommendations were tailored towards anti-violence and not things like alternative emergency response. I don't say that to deflect from the question. I say it to just state their position and where they're coming from. So folks, let us know. What do you think about that question?
So I definitely appreciate the question. I think from my perspective as somebody serving survivors of domestic violence, it's important for us to have opportunities throughout the city for folks to be able to seek help from wherever they feel most comfortable. And so that is why I think working together amongst teams is so important. I see our victim advocate from the Somerville Police Department is sitting here, and certainly the Somerville Police Department is aware that people have different levels of comfortability of where they're going to go seek help, and that's why those sort of relationship building opportunities to make sure that survivors know that there are ways that they can get support, whether it's from the police or from other support services in the community. Certainly from our perspective at Respond, we have folks that sometimes come to us that are maybe a little bit nervous about reporting to the police, and then we have an opportunity to say, well, we actually know of an advocate that works there. I could connect you with that person. You could speak to her first and then make a decision about what you want to report. So people have a lot of choices, and I think as long as we're working together and communicating to the community different ways that they can seek support and get assistance, that to me is the primary, the most important thing.
Thanks for the question. Folks, we have a little bit more time. Any other questions?
We got one right here.
Hi, I'm Judy Pineda-Dufeld. I'm the Ward 7 City Councilor. Thank you so much for all of your hard work to all of the panelists tonight. I'm curious, as I read through the report and the recommendations, there isn't a focus in any way on our youth and our schools and safety issues here. We saw this summer our own central library had to close in the middle of the day for several weeks because of violence and safety issues. And I guess I'm curious, you know, I picked up on what one of the panelists said about we want to work from a place of prevention. I noticed in one of the recommendations that the city should engage young adults aged 18 to 26 around connecting them with programming. Were there discussions around those younger than 18, other prevention opportunities for us to engage our young people? You know, the Boston Youth Jobs Program is actually a public safety and prevention model. You know, are there ways in which we can think about how we engage our young people in Somerville differently around anti-violence work?
Gio, what do you think?
Thank you, Pam Neufeld, for that question. The 18 to 26 came about through conversations that we had mostly on the youth panel around that there does tend to be, although not as robust as they should be, a lot of programs for school-age children up to 18, and especially younger children, but then there's a gap if kids do not then go to college or enter a trade or something like that for them to keep out of violent situations, and especially if at that point they're no longer welcome in their home and have that support. So that's kind of where that number came from, although it is very important to educate at younger levels around either having activities and mentorship programs, as well as, like we said with the domestic violence recommendation around teaching about healthy relationships and the consequences of violence.
Latoya, I think we had one more question over here, and then we're going to call it.
Hi, my name is Sam Altman. I live in Ward 5 near Magoon Square. I'm also really proud to be a sibling of Marianne. I was really happy to see this report really engaging on traffic safety. I bike to work every day, and as I saw from the Public Safety for All survey, I am far from the only person in Somerville who feels deeply unsafe biking to work on Broadway. That was actually the #1 place people from Somerville said they felt unsafe was on a bike. And the #1 safety concern that people identified in that survey was traffic safety. So I was really glad to see this report engaging with that. Something I was sort of curious about was a lot of the recommendations that came out were around trying to do some more public promotion and trying to do education around it, which I think is really important. However, we also know, you know, something we know in city budgets is often a police officer is the most expensive way to solve a problem. And there's a lot of traffic safety stuff, particularly around like traffic details at construction sites, where a lot of other cities have actually civilianized that and brought it over to civilian employees, which allows them to do more enforcement for less money. Is that something we've thought about in Somerville, and is that something we could try to do to make our streets safer?
It's a great question. I'm going to answer it. I think it's a little bit outside of the scope of the anti-violence working group. Two thoughts. One, shout out to bike community, yes. Also, folks, the Somerville Open Data Portal is a great resource where our Public Safety for All survey results are now live, and you can engage with them, and you will find that overwhelmingly in almost every single place in this city, people ranked traffic safety as a top priority. You'll notice engaging with these reports, specifically the Public Safety for All report, that group did make a recommendation that Somerville Police Department could explore using civilians in the department for certain situations. I think something like a traffic detail could certainly be a situation like that. There was other things like a property crime, things of that nature. So the Public Safety for All group did take a look at, you know, not quite directed to your question, but related to your question, civilianizing parts of SPD or some of the details, some of the things that SPD currently does. And so if folks are curious about the Public Safety for All Task Force perception on that and recommendations on that, you can find those now online in their report. And with that being said, I think we're going to call it. I think we're going to get back to Amanda, who's going to close us out. Thank you so much to this group and my other panelists tonight, both for being here and being a part of this whole process. As I think we made clear, it took a long time, it took a lot of energy, it took a lot of effort, so shout out to them. And thank you to everyone else in attendance tonight for your energy and your effort to be here and engage with this.
Okay. As our anti-violence working group members are making their ways back to their seats, thank you, Steve. I do want to take a moment to again thank all of our task force and working group members, but an extra special thank you to the representatives who decided to be a part of our panels today. As you saw throughout the presentations, they are not the entirety of the groups. We had their photos of all of the members, but I do want to give a really big round of applause to those who decided to represent so that you can ask them questions and things that they couldn't have anticipated. And I know that that wasn't easy, so I want to make sure that we give them that thanks. So thank you to all of the panelists this afternoon. Moving right along, as we mentioned at the beginning, this is not the end of the conversation in any way, shape, or form. The city is committed to truly seeing what public safety for all looks like in action. You being here tonight is continuing to move that along. And as we mentioned, we already have our next step in motion, and that is the hiring for the Public Safety for All program manager. So as I mentioned, you can scan the QR code, you can find the information online, but that position is going to be a termed position, and they are going to work directly with the mayor's office and departments to review the recommendations of all three of the groups that we talked about today, and they are going to map out the work plans for each initiative. And I know you're wondering, why do we need a particular person to do that? Because as you can imagine, for work that took 20 plus months, to get here, we need someone who has dedicated time to be able to coordinate across multiple departments, multiple stakeholders, including our community, and some of our task force and working group members as we move forward. So we encourage you to apply, share the link, ask questions. This is certainly not an end to our journey, and we thank you again for being here. If you have any further questions, do not hesitate to reach out to myself. Our PIO officer, I don't even know, oh, there he is. Also want to give a shout out to him for moderating tonight. His humor is always appreciated in that, and to the entire RSJ team for all that we did to get here. Many of us have seen, we were out there canvassing, door knocking, and to see the work of these three groups come kind of to a close. I say kind of because we know it's never fully done, is a really big win. So thank you all to that. And again, if you have questions, do not hesitate to reach out. Have a good evening and safe travels.